Good afternoon, and sorry for the delay. Without actually further delay, so that we can start the press conference as soon as possible, I will give the floor to HRVP Josep Borrell to brief you on the outcome of today's Foreign Affairs Council. Josep Borrell, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Today the Council meet again, and I'm happy that we could meet again in person. It makes things easier. I had, as always, a dense agenda. Let me start with the good news. The good news that today we adopted the European Union Global Human Rights Sanctions regime. It is exactly 1 year after we had agreed to do so. 1 year later, we deliver. This is a landmark agreement. This is the first of its kind, and I think it will allow the European Union to target seriously human rights abuses and violations worldwide and not going case by case with endless discussion for any specific case. We are sending a clear signal to those responsible about the strong commitment to human rights of the European Union. The new sanctions regime gives us the opportunity ahead of the International Rights of Human Day, 10th of December, 3 days from now. It's a good thing that this agreement coincides with the Human Rights Day. We will focus on a specific area, as I said, rather than a geographical approach country by country. Perpetrators can be banned from entering the European Union, their assets in the European Union frozen, and European Union persons prohibited from making any funds available to them. We have been working a whole year round trying to set up the specific competences of the Commission and the Council, the Member States, and finally we get an agreement that will allow us to implement this sanctions regime. I'm very happy of that. And I want to thank all the colleagues in the Foreign Affairs Council, and especially to the ones who launched this initiative at the beginning. I'm thinking in Holland and others. Second, in Venezuela, we have just issued a statement about the legislative elections that took place yesterday. As expected, we have already said it, evaluating the way these elections were planned, not to be able to consider them free, fair or democratic, and that the result doesn't represent the will of the Venezuelan people. This has gone ahead of a national agreement on electoral conditions, failed to comply with the minimum international standards, and failed also to mobilize the Venezuelan people to participate. We want to use this opportunity to stress that Venezuela needs a political solution to end the current impasse and to allow for the delivery of the urgent required humanitarian assistance to its people. The European Union calls on the Venezuelan authorities and leaders to prioritize the interests of the Venezuelan people and to urgently come together to start a Venezuelan-led transition process. And we are ready to support such a process, as we have tried to do in the past. We also discussed the situation in Georgia. It's time for Georgian political forces to show leadership and enable parliamentary representation. I hope that the latest proposal by Georgian Dream will open the door for a compromise, which would enable Parliament to advance on the much-needed electoral and judicial reform and address the socio-economic challenges. Turkey, as you can imagine, we have been talking a lot about Turkey on the eve of the European Union Council that will deal with the issue of our relationship with Turkey. The ministers, all of them considered that we have not seen a fundamental change of direction on the Turkey behavior. By the contrary, in several aspects, the situation has worsened. The seismic survey activities in the region are still going on. So the evaluation by the Foreign Affairs Ministers of the situation is not a positive one. And each minister will brief the heads of state of government for this crucial European Union Council that will take end this week. We also touch on the situation in Belarus, where continued repression by authorities against the population has to stop, and we are finalizing the third package of sanctions. I hope it will be quickly adopted. I am hoping for swift adoption. I'm sure this time it will not be other issues that will delay the adoption of this third package of sanctions. We also raised the situation in Ethiopia and the destabilization in the region. I informed the College of the visit of Commissioner Lenargic to Sudan and to the refugees camp in the border with Ethiopia. He went also to Addis Ababa. Our message is very clear. Our hostilities and the ethnic targeted violence must stop. Civilians and refugees must be protected. International law has to be respected. We strongly request the Ethiopian government for full access for humanitarian actors to the Tigray region. This access has to be granted to all institutions, United Nations institutions, ONGs. We are very much concerned by the report atrocities that should thoroughly be investigated and the perpetrators held accountable. There is a crossroad blaming from different parts. There is quite a big blackout about what's happening in Ethiopia. But there are 40,000 refugees massing in Sudan, and the only way to go back to a peaceful and sustainable settlement of the conflict, with a strong support given to the African Union initiative. We also reviewed the implementation of the draconian national security law imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing. The ministers agreed on their assessment of the situation, which has been strongly deteriorated, with severe blows to political pluralism and freedom of opinion, which we repeatedly condemn. The European Union will, as a minimum, to continue to implement the concilium conclusions, expressing political support for Hong Kong's autonomy under the one country, two system principle. And as you know, it has been reaffirmed today that several European Union member states have suspended their extradition agreements on their negotiations with Hong Kong. We discussed about the European Union-United States relations after having presented with the Commission for a new plan for a new EU-US agenda for global change. The ministers welcome this joint communication from the Commission and the High Representative, and emphasized that a strong, reciprocal and far-sighted partnership should become the backbone for a renewed global alliance between the EU and US. For this EU-US agenda to be implemented, we need a united and self-reliant European Union. This is good for Europe. This is going to be good for the transatlantic partnership and for the multilateral system. And this discussion brought us naturally to the last point in our agenda, which was a discussion on our strategic autonomy. The ministers got involved in a deep discussion about the meaning of these two words, which has been highly polemical recently, but they are not news. They have been used by the European Union Council conclusions since 2013, and you can find that in the global strategy of 2016 and almost everywhere. But it's clear that it's not talking about protectionism. Someone wants to call it open strategic autonomy, to stress the fact that it's not to go back to any kind of autarky or protectionism, for sure not. It's not directed against anyone. It's about choosing our interdependency instead of having it imposed on us. Be it with masks when the pandemic arrived, be by technologies now and in the future. We must be able to act multilaterally when we can. This is our preference. But also to be able to act autonomously when we must, in order to promote and defend more effectively our interests and values. This approach goes further of the defense and security issues. Strategic autonomy was born on the field of defense and security, but now it reaches almost everything. It reaches broader priorities on the internal and external dimensions, digital, the package approved by the Commission last week, and it has to be done in close coordination with the Commission and the Member States. This discussion will continue in order to increase the European Union resilience and strengthening our multilateral engagement. Transatlantic relations and strategic autonomy goes hand in hand. They are the two sides of the same coin. Both are indispensable and complementary dimensions of a more strategic approach to the challenging geopolitical environment that we are facing today. The communication from the Commission that the ministers welcome, it's a first approach about how to build these new transatlantic relations, and we will continue working in order to make people understand clearly what we are talking about when we say strategic autonomy, which has nothing to do with protectionism, or nothing to do with going apart from the NATO efforts. There is no alternative for the NATO for the point of view of the territorial defense of Europe, but it doesn't prevent us from developing capacities in order to defend better our interests and values. Well, this has been the intense meeting today with my colleagues.
Thank you, High Representative. And now I open the floor to questions. And the first question goes to Athanasios. You have the floor. Please present yourself and your media. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Athanasios, CNA, Star TV, Greece. Mr. High Representative, after the discussion you had, what should we expect now from the European Council on Turkey? Do we have to expect some kind of additional listings on existing means of sanctions, or some kind of stepping up of the Gimnich catalog, the one that you have presented back in August? And additionally, what did Greece and Cyprus specifically request from the Council during today's discussion on this issue? Thank you.
Well, the Council will do what they said they were going to do, to assess the situation, to assess the evolutions in the last European Union Council, and according with that, to take the decision that they consider pertinent. I cannot advance you, which is going to be the debate and the conclusions of the Council. But not only Greece and Cyprus. I think that all member states were very much aware of the need to assess carefully the situation with Turkey. As I said, unhappily, we haven't seen much of progress or improvement since the last European Union Council. But don't ask me to anticipate the debate and the decisions of the European leaders.
Thank you. Mira, you have the floor.
So, I'm here.
Mira.
Yes, I'm there. Okay, okay, perfect. Mr. Borrell, 2 questions on Venezuela, if I may. If I understand well, you want that the member states support the transition in Venezuela. Does it mean that the consensus will be to keep Juan Guaidó as interim president? The first. And the second, the Council has just approved a new instrument for human rights sanctions on human rights violations. On Venezuela, ex-President Zapatero told the EU to rethink the sanctions for Venezuela. Is that incoherent? How can we understand that? Thank you.
Well, I am not here to comment the opinions of Mr. Zapatero, who respect fully. But it's not my job as High Representative of the European Union to comment the declarations of everybody involved on the Venezuelan issue. You know, nothing more than I has been working to try to make these elections inclusive and to build the conditions for the oppositions to participate, and in order for the European Union to recognize the result. I think that I did a lot. Well, I didn't get a lot, but I work a lot for that. That's why I am more sorry. I am very sorry for a situation where the European Union, the ministers, unanimously agreed on assessment that says that these elections failed to comply with the minimum international standards. I am reading the communiqué. For a credible process, they failed to mobilize the Venezuelan people to participate. They are not being considered inclusive, transparent, and the result cannot be recognized by the European Union. This is the unanimous decision of the member states gathered in this Foreign Affairs Council. We haven't said anything more. We haven't entered in other issues. In fact, the important day is the 5th of January, when the new assembly will take office. We don't recognize it. We don't recognize the process. We don't recognize it, the democratic character of this process. But we haven't got into any other questions as the one you were asking for. It will be time for it. At the time being, I am planning to call for a meeting of the contact group, maybe afterwards another together with the group of Lima, who already issued a statement yesterday, and we'll see how do we deal with this new situation.
Okay, thank you. Nureddin, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you.
Is it okay now? Is it okay now?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. High Representative. I have a couple of questions. I'm Nordin Fridi from Al Arabiya News Channel. Did you discuss the Greek request from member states to regarding the arms embargo against Turkey? And do you still see room for diplomacy to solve the differences with Ankara? Thank you.
The diplomacy has been invented to solve differences peacefully through dialogue. And that's what I try to do.
Okay. The next is Stuart Law. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, High Representative. Stuart Lau from the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. First of all, in terms of the human rights sanctions regime, last year when you were presenting the Sakharov Prize, you told the daughter of the recipient from the Uyghur community in Xinjiang that you would push for the regime. And now that you have the regime, is the issue of the Uyghurs going to be on the table as a next step? And secondly, on the question of Hong Kong, we've seen no updates on the EU response package today. Does it mean that it is in the EU's opinion that the situation in Hong Kong today is not getting any worse than it was half a year ago? Thank you.
Bueno, creo que I think I already said that the ministers consider that the situation has been deteriorating and the situation continues to degrade, and the European Union members expressed a clear message about the situation in Hong Kong. It's true that no new measures has been taken today, but for sure we are very much aware of how the situation in Hong Kong is evolving. No further measures has been taken today, which doesn't exclude that they could be considered later.
Thank you. The next goes to Lawrence. D'accord. And it will be the last one, I'm afraid.
Hi there. Thanks for taking the question. Hi, Reb, you didn't answer the first question of Stuart just now, and it links to a question that I had. You have the Magnitsky sanction of the EU global human rights sanctions now in front of you. You're an important player. Who would be top of your list? And as Stuart asked you, will Chinese officials involved in the repression of the Uyghur should they be considered for human rights sanctions? And my second question is on strategic autonomy. You wrote a very long, very detailed blog on your views on strategic autonomy a few days ago, and you really focused on we need to stop arguing about the concept and make it real, make it concrete. So what came out of today's discussion? Beyond defining it, what is going to be started, what is going to be launched concretely to improve the EU's strategic autonomy? Thank you.
Well, about sanctions. Sanctions are triggered when a member state put a proposal. By the time being, no one has done it. Once again, it doesn't prevent that from happening in the future. But for the time being, about your specific question, no member state has put on the table a proposal for sanctioning. Let's see in the future. By the time being, my concrete answer, it's clear. Thank you for reading my text. I tried to develop longer by written procedure that the thing that you can do in a oral communication. No? You know, these two words, strategic autonomy, has a lot of ideological weight. And we should get rid of this ideological dimension, no? And be practical. It comes from the field of defense. And now some people look at that from the field of trade. For someone, it creates worries and suspicious because, oh, do you want to be autonomous? It means that you want to be less depending of imports and exports, so you want to be a little bit more autarky dimension. It's a threat against free trade. And others continue looking at that from the defense point of view. No? You want to be autonomous, it means that you don't want to participate in partnerships. Well, both approaches are wrong. Autonomy has nothing to do with autarky. It has nothing to do with jeopardizing our military partnership and our transatlantic relations. But which is the contrary of autonomy? Dependency. Who wants to be dependent? Nobody wants to be dependent. And when you face dependencies, as we face it with the pandemic came, and we realized suddenly that we were depending on such a humble thing like a textile mask, then we wanted to recover autonomy by producing at home what the global markets were unable to supply suddenly. And this has created a stronger awareness of our dependencies, our weakness, and I think that there's a strong feeling that we have to be fighting against any kind of dependency situation. And we are doing that. The Commission is doing a lot. It doesn't label like this, but all the digital package that we approved yesterday, it's oriented to enhance our own capacities and show our autonomy or lack of dependency. You know? And we are also working on communication on European economic sovereignty. Which is a stronger word, sovereignty or autonomy? There is another debate about it, no? And some people prefer to talk about sovereignty, and other people prefer autonomy. And, well, this is a semantic discussion, but words matters. Words matters. What I want to put on the table, and I think we have to continue working on that, is how to ensure that we will not go on the dangerous dependencies. And how do we ensure our capacity to face things that we don't agree with? For example, the extraterritorial sanctions imposed by some states that affects negatively our firms. We refuse, we don't accept this kind of extraterritoriality, but in practical terms, it has effects. Well, if we don't accept, we should be able to resist it. This is part of the autonomy. Let's talk about autonomy as lack of dependency.
Okay, thank you very much. And this is the end of our press conference today. Thank you all for attending it. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to the Council. Thank you, Mr. High Representative.
Gracias.